Welcome to the PeopleWorks PeopleCast, where we talk about practical strategies that can transform your business. Buckle up as we talk about HR, business, finance, and more to help you get to the next level.
Keeping up with the news these days is, well, it's a lot, especially when you're busy, running a business and all that. But we can't just ignore things like government regulations, especially right now with this administration. Immigration and employment practices are really under the microscope. So today we're diving into I-9 compliance. We're looking at this article, Why This Matters, Government Scrutiny is About to Get Even Tighter. It's by Jonathan Pocius, the CEO of PeopleWorks.
Yeah, a lot of business owners and HR people I talk to, they're definitely feeling the pressure. It feels like there's a storm coming.
It does, doesn't it? But this isn't just about checking boxes on some form. It's about protecting your business and your employees, too. And honestly, even your own peace of mind.
Exactly. We're going to break down I-9 compliance, really get into the essentials so you can adapt to this new environment and minimize risk.
So let's set the stage first. Historically, what happens when a new administration takes over? How does that impact immigration policy and enforcement?
Well, it's a little bit like a pendulum swinging back and forth.
Yeah.
New administrations, they come in with their own priorities. Immigration enforcement, it's usually an area where we see noticeable shifts. And what we're seeing now, I think, is a clear signal. This administration is taking a stricter approach. Businesses need to be extra vigilant.
Okay, so let's say our listener owns a small manufacturing company, maybe 50 employees or so. What does that shift actually mean for them? Day to day, I mean.
Okay, so picture this. You've just hired a new production worker. Super excited to start. Now, the first thing, really, no matter what, is to get that I-9 form filled out. Every single new hire, no matter their citizenship, no exceptions.
There are deadlines for that, right?
You bet. The employee, they need to do their part, Section 1, by the first day of work. Then you, as the employer, you have 3 business days to complete Section 2. That's where you look at the documents, make sure everything matches up, and they're authorized to work in the U.S.
And that's where things get a little tricky, I imagine. I bet our listeners are thinking, okay, what documents do I need to check?
Yeah.
And how do I know if they're legit?
Yeah, I hear that all the time. It's a really common concern. This is where understanding the matching principle becomes so important. It's like a puzzle. The info on Section 1 from the employee, it needs to match perfectly with the documents they give you for Section 2. And those documents have to prove they're authorized to work.
So, like, if an employee gives you a driver's license and a social security card.
Exactly. You got to make sure the names and everything line up on both and that the social security number is valid.
This is where employers slip up, right?
All the time. They might miss a little mistake in a name or a date of birth, or they just aren't familiar with all the acceptable documents.
Pocius, he actually gives a good example in the article. An employer rejected a permanent resident card. Totally valid, but it was a few years old, a little worn. The employer wanted a newer document. It ended up delaying the employee's start date. Just caused a ton of tension that wasn't necessary. Yeah. It's a perfect example of why training is so important. Your HR team, whoever is involved in hiring, they need to know which documents to accept and really understand the matching principle. If you don't, you end up making those kinds of mistakes.
Makes sense. Now, Pocius also talks about ITINs. I think a lot of people might not even know what those are or how they relate to all this.
Right, ITIN. That stands for Individual Taxpayer Identification Number. The IRS gives them to people who need a taxpayer ID, but they can't get a social security number. And here's the thing. Having an ITN does not mean you're authorized to work in the U.S.
Got it. So if our listener is looking at an ITN for their new employee, what should they do?
Ooh, big red flag. You have to be careful. Remember that they have to show you they are who they say they are, and D, that they are allowed to work here. And an ITN doesn't prove either of those things.
Okay, so what if the employee says, oh, I'm allowed to work here. I just haven't gotten my social security card yet.
See, that's where it gets really, really tricky. You have to balance compliance with the anti-discrimination laws. You absolutely cannot assume someone isn't allowed to work here just because they have an ITN. You have to give them a chance to give you the right documents.
So how do you walk that line?
You have to be really careful with your process and how you communicate. You could say something like, okay, to finish the I-9, we have to verify 2 things: your identity and your work authorization here in the U.S. An ITN doesn't show work authorization, so can you give me a different document from List A? Or a combination of documents from Lists B and C? You're being clear about the rules, but you're not making any assumptions about their status.
Okay, so we've talked about verifying documents, but what happens after the I-9 is done? Is that it?
Well, not quite. This is where internal audits come in. POSIUS really pushes these as super important for a good I-9 compliance strategy, I mean.
Internal audits. I have to admit, that sounds a little intimidating. What does that even involve? I know, right? But it doesn't have to be scary. Think of it like this. You're double-checking your work before you turn it in. You want to catch any mistakes before someone else does.
Right.
An internal audit, it's the same idea, but for your I-9s. You're making sure everything is complete and accurate,
Yeah.
and that you are following all the latest rules.
So it's like a safety net.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
better to find and fix mistakes yourself than to have the government find them, right?
Definitely. How often should businesses be doing these audits?
It depends, really, on how big your business is
Mm.
and how often you hire new people. But I'd say at least once a year. If you're in an industry with lots of turnover, like our manufacturing company example, then maybe even more often. Every 6 months, maybe.
That makes sense. Okay, so let's say our listener does an audit and they find a few errors, like maybe Section 2 wasn't finished on time or a document wasn't looked at carefully enough. What should they do?
First thing, don't panic. It happens. The important thing is to fix them quickly and the right way. I would talk to an immigration lawyer or a really experienced HR pro, someone who can help you fix things the right way.
So having an expert you can call is a good idea.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially with I-9 stuff, the rules can be so confusing. Having someone to guide you can really save you a headache later on.
Definitely. Now, POSIUS also talks about training a lot for HR staff, hiring managers, anyone involved in the process. Why is that so important?
Well, because the rules change all the time. Immigration laws, I mean. It's not a one-and-done kind of thing.
Right.
Your team needs to know what's new and the best ways to do things. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for mistakes.
It's like continuing education to keep your license up to date.
Yeah, perfect analogy. You wouldn't want a doctor using outdated info, right? Same thing with your HR team. Not knowing the law is not an excuse.
Got it. So what kind of training is out there for I-9s?
Lots of options, actually. Online courses, those are good. You can do them at your own pace.
Mm-hmm.
Then there are in-person workshops, more hands-on. You can ask questions and stuff. And you can even get training customized for your industry.
So there's something for everyone. How often should employees be trained?
I'd say at least once a year to refresh, especially if any big rules have changed. But again, kind of depends on your industry and the level of risk you're dealing with.
Okay. So we've got internal audits, we've got training. What else should our listeners be thinking about with I-9 compliance?
Let me think. Oh, POSIUS talks about record retention and security. It seems like a small thing, but it really matters.
Okay.
You need a safe system for storing those I-9s, and you have to keep them separate from other employee files.
Why is that so important?
It's about keeping that information safe, making sure no one can access it that shouldn't. These forms have personal info on them, names, addresses, social security numbers. If that stuff gets into the wrong hands,
Not good.
exactly. It could lead to identity theft or other bad stuff.
So how can businesses keep their I-9s safe?
Well, POSIUS recommends,
Yeah.
like secure storage, locked cabinets, or even better, an electronic system where you can restrict who has access.
Okay.
And when you're done with old I-9s, you can't just throw them in the trash.
No bonfire in the parking lot.
Nope. You have to destroy them the right way, shred them, or burn them, or pulp them. Make sure no one can read that info ever again.
So I-9 compliance, it's about being thorough at every step, from getting those forms to storing them and getting rid of them.
Yep. It's all about paying attention to the details and doing things by the book.
But it's more than just checking boxes, right?
Oh, for sure. It's about doing the right thing. You want a workplace that's fair for everyone and inclusive.
Yeah.
It falls a lot, obviously. You're protecting your business, your employees, and yourself.
It sounds like if you approach I-9 compliance strategically, it can actually make your whole organization better.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. It's not just about avoiding fines. It's about building a better business.
It seems like a lot of business owners might be kind of scared of I-9 compliance, like they just want to avoid getting in trouble. But POSIUS, he has a different way of looking at it, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. It's an important point.
So how does he see it?
Well, he sees compliance as an opportunity.
An opportunity? How do you mean?
Think about it. When you make I-9 compliance a priority, you're not just avoiding risks. You're actually showing that you care about doing business ethically. And you're creating a workplace where everyone feels welcome, no matter who they are or where they come from.
Right, so it's about putting your values into action.
Exactly. And that can make a big difference. It can boost morale,
Yeah.
help you keep your employees, and even give your company a better reputation. It's like you're building a really strong foundation for your whole business.
So instead of seeing I-9 compliance as a chore,
And
businesses can use it to make things better for everyone.
exactly. It's a different way of thinking about it,
Yeah.
but it can make a big difference.
Okay, so as we wrap things up here, what's the main thing you want our listeners to take away from all this?
I think it's this. Don't be afraid to learn. The more you know about I-9 compliance, the better. You'll feel more confident. You'll know what to do. It can seem complicated, but there are resources out there to help. You don't have to figure it all out on your own.
And sometimes the hardest part is just getting started.
So true. So for our listeners, if you're feeling lost, start by looking at what you're doing now. Where are the gaps? Then make a plan to fix them, one step at a time.
This has been really helpful. Thanks for walking us through it.
Happy to do it.
And for our listeners, we hope this deep dive has given you the tools you need to create a workplace that's both compliant and compassionate. It's a tough world out there, but staying informed and being proactive, that's how you succeed.
And that's it for today. Be sure to check us out at peopleworks.io, and as always, tune in next time.